You can ask your computer to read it aloud, or you can search the text for a quotation to cite in a book report or to use in your SIG. In other words, most people who download the book do so for the predictable reason, and in a predictable format, say, to sample a chapter in the HTML format before deciding whether to buy the book. But the thing that differentiates a boring e-text experience from an exciting one is the minority use, printing out a couple chapters of the book to bring to the beach rather than risk getting the hard copy wet and salty. Tool makers and software designers are increasingly aware of the notion of affordances in design. You can bash a nail into the wall with any heavy, heftable object from a rock to a hammer to a cast iron skillet. However, there's something about a hammer that cries out for nail bashing. It has affordances that tilt its holder towards swinging it. And, as we all know, when all you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. The affordance of a computer, the thing it's designed to do, is to slice and dice collections of bits. The affordance of the Internet is to move bits at very high speed around the world at little to no cost. It follows from this that the center of the ebook experience is going to involve slicing and dicing text and sending it around. Copyright lawyers have a word for these activities: infringement. That's because copyright gives creators a near-total monopoly over copying and remixing of their work, pretty much forever. Theoretically, copyright expires, but in actual practice, copyright gets extended every time the early Mickey Mouse cartoons are about to enter the public domain, because Disney swings a very big stick on the hill. This is a huge problem. The biggest possible problem. Here's why. Chart. How broken copyright screws everyone. Asterisk authors freak out. Authors have been schooled by their peers that strong copyright is the only thing that keeps them from getting savagely rogered in the marketplace. This is pretty much true. It's strong copyright that often defends authors from their publishers' worst excesses. However, it doesn't follow that strong copyright protects you from your readers. Asterisk readers get indignant over being called crooks. Seriously. You're a small businessperson. Readers are your customers. Calling them crooks is bad for business. Asterisk publishers freak out. Publishers freak out because they're in the business of grabbing as much copyright as they can and hanging onto it for dear life because, damn it, you never know. This is why science fiction magazines try to trick writers into signing over improbable rights for things like theme park rides and action figures based on their work. It's also why literary agents are now asking for copyright-long commissions on the books they represent. Copyright covers so much ground and takes too long to shake off. Who wouldn't want a piece of it? Asterisk liability goes through the roof. Copyright infringement, especially on the net, is a supercrime. It carries penalties of $150 per infringement, and aggrieved rights holders and their representatives have all kinds of special powers, like the ability to force an ISP to turn over your personal information before showing evidence of your alleged infringement to a judge. This means that anyone who suspects that he might be on the wrong side of copyright law is going to be terribly risk-averse. Publishers non-negotiably force their authors to indemnify them from infringement claims and go one better, forcing writers to prove that they have cleared any material they quote, even in the case of brief fair-use quotations, like song titles at the opening of chapters. The result is that authors end up assuming potentially life-destroying liability, are chilled from quoting material around them, and are scared off of public domain texts because an honest mistake about the public domain status of a work carries such a terrible price. Asterisk posterity vanishes. In the Eldred v. Ashcroft Supreme Court hearing last year, the court found that 98% of the works in copyright are no longer earning money for anyone, but that figuring out who these old works belong to with the degree of certainty that you'd want when one mistake means total economic apocalypse would cost more than you could ever possibly earn on them. That means that 98% of works will largely expire long before the copyright on them does. Today, the names of science fiction's ancestral founders, Mary Shelley, Arthur Conan Doyle, Edgar Allan Poe, Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, are still known, their work still a part of the discourse. Their spiritual descendants from Hugo Gernsback onward may not be so lucky. If their work continues to be protected by copyright, it might just vanish from the face of the earth before it reverts to the public domain. This isn't to say that copyright is bad, but that there's such a thing as good copyright and bad copyright, and that sometimes, too much good copyright is a bad thing. It's like chilies in soup, a little goes a long way, and too much spoils the broth. From the Luther Bible to the first phonorecords, from radio to the pulps, from cable to MP3, the world has shown that its first preference for new media is its democraticness, the ease with which it can reproduce. And please, before we get any farther, forget all that business about how the Internet's copying model is more disruptive than the technologies that preceded it. For Christ's sake, the vaudeville performers who sued Marconi for inventing the radio had to go from a regime where they had 100% control over who could get into the theater and hear them perform to a regime where they had 0% control over who could build or acquire a radio and tune into a recording of them performing. For that matter, look at the difference between a monkish Bible and a Luther Bible, next to that phase change. Napster is peanuts. Back to democraticness. Every successful new medium has traded off its artifactness, the degree to which it was populated by bespoke hunks of atoms, cleverly nailed together by master craftspeople, for ease of reproduction. Piano rolls weren't as expressive as good piano players, but they scaled better, as did radio broadcasts, pulp magazines, and MP3s. Liner notes, hand illumination and leather bindings are nice, but they pale in comparison to the ability of an individual to actually get a copy of her own. Which isn't to say that old media die. Artists still hand-illuminate books, master pianists still stride the boards at Carnegie Hall, and the shelves burst with tell-all biographies of musicians that are richer in detail than any liner notes booklet. The thing is, when all you've got is monks, every book takes on the character of a monkish Bible. Once you invent the printing press, all the books that are better suited to movable type migrate into that new form. What's left behind are those items that are best suited to the old production scheme, the plays that need to be plays, the books that are especially lovely on creamy paper stitched between covers, the music that is most enjoyable performed live and experienced in a throng of humanity. Increased democraticness translates into decreased control. It's a lot harder to control who can copy a book once there's a photocopier on every corner than it is when you need a monastery and several years to copy a Bible. And that decreased control demands a new copyright regime that rebalances the rights of creators with their audiences. For example, when the VCR was invented, the courts affirmed a new copyright exemption for time shifting. When the radio was invented, the Congress granted an antitrust exemption to the record labels in order to secure a blanket license. When cable TV was invented, the government just ordered the broadcasters to sell the cable operators access to programming at a fixed rate. Copyright is perennially out of date, because its latest rev was generated in response to the last generation of technology. The temptation to treat copyright as though it came down off the mountain on 2 stone tablets, or worse, as just like real property, is deeply flawed, since, by definition, current copyright only considers the last generation of tech. So, are bookwares in violation of copyright law? Duh. Is this the end of the world? Duh. If the Catholic Church can survive the printing press, science fiction will certainly weather the advent of bookwares. Lanyap. We're almost done here, but there's one more thing I'd like to do before I get off the stage. Lanyap, an unexpected bonus or extra. Think of it as a lanyap, a little something extra to thank you for your patience. About a year ago, I released my first novel. Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom, on the net, under the terms of the most restrictive Creative Commons license available. All it allowed my readers to do was send around copies of the book. I was cautiously dipping my toe into the water, though at the time, it felt like I was taking a plunge. Now I'm going to take a plunge. Today, I will relicense the text of Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom under a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike Derivs Non-Commercial license, human readable license, which means that as of today, you have my blessing to create derivative works from my first book. You can make movies, audiobooks, translations, fan fiction/fiction, God help us, geek hierarchy, furry/fiction, geek hierarchy detail, poetry, translations. T-shirts, you name it, with 2 provisos. That 1, you have to allow everyone else to rip, mix and burn your creations in the same way you're hacking mine, and on the other hand, you've got to do it non-commercially. The sky didn't fall when I dipped my toe in. Let's see what happens when I get in up to my knees. The text with the new license will be online before the end of the day. Check craphound.com/down for details. Oh, and I'm also releasing the text of this speech under a Creative Commons public domain dedication. Public domain dedication, giving it away to the world to do with as it see fits. It'll be linked off my blog. Boing boing, before the day is through. $. Free, Economic e-books, originally published in Locus magazine. September 2007. Can giving away free electronic books really sell printed books? I think so. As I explained in my March column, you do like reading off a computer screen. I don't believe that most readers want to read long-form works off a screen, and I don't believe that they will ever want to read long-form works off a screen. As I say in the column, the problem with reading off a screen isn't resolution, eye strain, or compatibility with reading in the bathtub. It's that computers are seductive, they tempt us to do other things, making concentrating on a long-form work impractical. Sure, some readers have the cognitive quirk necessary to read full-length works off screens, or are motivated to do so by other circumstances, such as being so broke that they could never hope to buy the printed work. The rational question isn't, will giving away free e-books cost me sales, but rather, will giving away free e-books win me more sales than it costs me? This is a very hard proposition to evaluate in a quantitative way. Books aren't lattes or cable knit sweaters, each book sells or doesn't due to factors that are unique to that title. It's hard to imagine an empirical, controlled study in which two equivalent books are published, and one is also available as a free download, the other not, and the difference calculated as a means of proving whether e-books hurt or help sales in the long run. I've released all of my novels as free downloads simultaneous with their print publication. If I had a time machine, I could re-release them without the free downloads and compare the royalty statements. Lacking such a device, I'm forced to draw conclusions from qualitative, anecdotal evidence, and I've collected plenty of that. Many writers have tried free e-book releases to tie in with the print release of their works. To the best of my knowledge, every writer who's tried this has repeated the experiment with future works, suggesting a high degree of satisfaction with the outcomes. A writer friend of mine had his first novel come out at the same time as mine. We write similar material and are often compared to one another by critics and reviewers. My first novel had a free download, his didn't. We compared sales figures and I was doing substantially better than him. He subsequently convinced his publisher to let him follow suit. Bain Books has a pretty good handle on expected sales for new volumes in long-running series. Having sold many such series, they have lots of data to use in sales estimates. If volume N sells X copies, we expect volume N+1 to sell Y copies. They report that they have seen a measurable uptick in sales following from free e-book releases of previous and current volumes. David Blackburn, a Harvard PhD candidate in economics, published a paper in 2004 in which he calculated that, for music, piracy results in a net increase in sales for all titles in the 75th percentile and lower, negligible change in sales for the middle class of titles between the 75th percentile and the 97th percentile, and a small drag on the super rich in the 97th percentile and higher. Publisher Tim O'Reilly describes this as piracy's progressive taxation, apportioning a small wealth redistribution to the vast majority of works, no net change to the middle, and a small cost on the richest few. Speaking of Tim O'Reilly, he has just published a detailed quantitative study of the effect of free downloads on a single title. O'Reilly Media published The Future of Telephony, in November 2005, simultaneously releasing the book as a free download. By March 2007, they had a pretty detailed picture of the sales cycle of this book, and, thanks to industry standard metrics like those provided by Bookscan, they could compare it apples to apples style, against the performance of competing books treating with the same subject. O'Reilly's conclusion: downloads didn't cause a decline in sales, and appears to have resulted in a lift in sales. This is particularly noteworthy because the book in question is a technical reference work, exclusively consumed by computer programmers who are by definition disposed to read off screens. Also, this is a reference work and therefore is more likely to be useful in electronic form, where it can be easily searched. In my case, my publishers have gone back to press repeatedly for my books. The print runs for each edition are modest. I'm a midlist writer in a world with a shrinking midlist, but publishers print what they think they can sell, and they're outselling their expectations. The new opportunities arising from my free downloads are so numerous as to be uncountable: foreign rights deals, comic book licenses, speaking engagements, article commissions. I've made more money in these secondary markets than I have in royalties. More anecdotes. I've had literally thousands of people approach me by email and at signings and cons to say, "I found your work online for free, got hooked, and started buying it." By contrast, I've had all of 5 emails from people saying, "Hey, idiot, thanks for the free book. Now I don't have to buy the print edition, ha ha." Many of us have assumed, a priori, that electronic books substitute for print books. While I don't have controlled, quantitative data to refute the proposition, I do have plenty of experience with this stuff, and all that experience leads me to believe that giving away my books is selling the hell out of them. More importantly, the free e-book skeptics have no evidence to offer in support of their position, just hand-waving and dark muttering about a mythological future when book lovers give up their printed books for electronic book readers, as opposed to the much more plausible future where book lovers go on buying their fetish objects and carry books around on their electronic devices. I started giving away e-books after I witnessed the early days of the bookwares scene, wherein fans cut the binding off their favorite books, scanned them, ran them through optical character recognition software, and manually proofread them to eliminate the digitization errors. These fans were easily spending 80 hours to rip their favorite books, and they were only ripping their favorite books, books they loved and wanted to share. The 80-hour figure comes from my own attempt to do this. I'm sure that rippers get faster with practice. I thought to myself that 80 hours free promotional effort would be a good thing to have at my disposal when my books entered the market. What if I gave my readers clean, canonical electronic editions of my works, saving them the bother of ripping them, and so freed them up to promote my work to their friends? After all, it's not like there's any conceivable way to stop people from putting books on scanners if they really want to. Scanners aren't going to get more expensive or slower. The internet isn't going to get harder to use. Better to confront this challenge head-on, turn it into an opportunity, than to rail against the future. I'm a science fiction writer, tuning into the future is supposed to be my métier. The timing couldn't have been better. Just as my first novel was being published, a new, high-tech project for promoting sharing of creative works launched. The Creative Commons Project, CC. CC offers a set of tools that make it easy to mark works with whatever freedoms the author wants to give away. CC launched in 2003 and today, more than 160.000.000 works have been released under its licenses. My next column will go into more detail on what CC is, what licenses it offers, and how to use them, but for now, check them out online at creativecommons.org. The Progressive Apocalypse and Other Futurismic Delights, originally published in Locus magazine. July 2007. Of course, science fiction is a literature of the present. Many's the science fiction writer who uses the future as a warped mirror for reflecting back the present day, angled to illustrate the hidden strangeness buried by our invisible assumptions. Orwell turned 1948 into 1984. But even when the fictional future isn't a parable about the present day, it is necessarily a creation of the present day, since it reflects the present-day biases that infuse the author. Hence Asimov's Foundation, a New Deal-esque project to think humanity out of its tribulations through social interventionism. Bold SF writers eschew the future altogether, embracing a futuristic account of the present day. William Gibson's forthcoming Spook Country is an act of speculative presentism, a book so futuristic it could only have been set in 2006, a book that exploits retrospective historical distance to let us glimpse just how alien and futuristic our present day is. Science fiction writers aren't the only people in the business of predicting the future. Futurists, consultants, technology columnists, analysts, venture capitalists, and entrepreneurial pitchmen spill a lot of ink, phosphors, and caffeinated hot air in describing a vision for a future where we'll get more and more of whatever it is they want to sell us or warn us away from. Tomorrow will feature faster, cheaper processors, more internet users, ubiquitous RFID tags, radically democratic political processes dominated by bloggers, massively multiplayer games whose virtual economies dwarf the physical economy. There's a lovely neologism to describe these visions. Futurismic media is that which depicts futurism. not the future. It is often self-serving. Think of the anti-grav Nikes in Back to the Future 3, and it generally doesn't hold up well to scrutiny. SF films and TV are great fonts of futurismic imagery. R2-D2 is a fully conscious AI, can hack the firewall of the Death Star, and is equipped with a range of holographic projectors and anti-personnel devices, but no one has installed a $15 sound card and some text-to-speech software on him, so he has to whistle like Harpo Marx. Or take the Starship Enterprise, with a transporter capable of constituting matter from digitally stored plans, and radios that can breach the speed of light. The non-futurismic version of NCC 1701 would be the size of a softball or whatever the minimum size for a warp drive. Transporter, and subspace radio would be. It would zip around the galaxy at FTL speeds under remote control. When it reached an interesting planet, it would beam a stored copy of a landing party onto the surface, and when their mission was over, it would beam them back into storage, annihilating their physical selves until they reached the next stopping point. If a member of the landing party were eaten by a green-skinned interspatial hippie or giant toga-wearing galactic tyrant, that member would be recovered from backup by the transporter beam. Hell, the entire landing party could consist of multiple copies of the most effective crewmember on board, no redshirts, just a half-dozen instances of Kirk operating in clonal harmony. Futurism has a psychological explanation, as recounted in Harvard clinical psych professor Daniel Gilbert's 2006 book, Stumbling on Happiness. Our memories and our projections of the future are necessarily imperfect. Our memories consist of those observations our brains have bothered to keep records of, woven together with inference and whatever else is lying around handy when we try to remember something. Ask someone who's eating a great lunch how breakfast was, and odds are she'll tell you it was delicious. Ask the same question of someone eating rubbery airplane food, and he'll tell you his breakfast was awful. We weave the past out of our imperfect memories and our observable present. We make the future in much the same way. We use reasoning and evidence to predict what we can, and whenever we bump up against uncertainty, we fill the void with the present day. Hence the injunction on women soldiers in the future of Starship Troopers, or the bizarre, glassed-over Progressland city diorama at the end of the 1964 World's Fair exhibit The Carousel of Progress, which Disney built for GE. Lapsarianism, the idea of a paradise lost, a fall from grace that makes each year worse than the last, is the predominant future feeling for many people. It's easy to see why, an imperfectly remembered golden childhood gives way to the worries of adulthood and physical senescence. Surely the world is getting worse. Nothing tastes as good as it did when we were 6, everything hurts all the time, and our matured gonads drive us into frenzies of bizarre, self-destructive behavior. Lapsarianism dominates the Abrahamic faiths. I have an Orthodox Jewish friend whose tradition holds that each generation of rabbis is necessarily less perfect than the rabbis that came before, since each generation is more removed from the perfection of the garden. Therefore, no rabbi is allowed to overturn any of his forebears' wisdom, since they are all, by definition, smarter than him. The natural endpoint of Lapsarianism is apocalypse. If things get worse, and worse, and worse, eventually they'll just run out of worseness. Eventually, they'll bottom out, a kind of rotten death of the universe when Lapsarian entropy hits the nadir and takes us all with it. Running counter to Lapsarianism is progressivism. The Enlightenment ideal of a world of great people standing on the shoulders of giants. Each of us contributes to improving the world's storehouse of knowledge and thus its capacity for bringing joy to all of us, and our descendants and protégés take our work and improve on it. The very idea of progress runs counter to the idea of Lapsarianism and the fall. It is the idea that we, as a species, are falling in reverse, combing back the wild tangle of entropy into a neat, tidy braid. Of course, progress must also have a boundary condition, if only because we eventually run out of imaginary ways that the human condition can improve. And science fiction has a name for the upper bound of progress, a name for the progressive apocalypse. We call it the singularity. Werner Vinge's singularity takes place when our technology reaches a stage that allows us to upload our minds into software, run them at faster, hotter speeds than our neurological wetware substrate allows for, and create multiple, parallel instances of ourselves. After the singularity, nothing is predictable because everything is possible. We will cease to be human and become, as the title of Rudy Rucker's next novel would have it, postsingular. The singularity is what happens when we have so much progress that we run out of progress. It's the apocalypse that ends the human race in rapture and joy. Indeed, Ken MacLeod calls the singularity, the rapture of the nerds, an apt description for the mirror world progressive version of the Lapsarian apocalypse. At the end of the day, both progress and the fall from grace are illusions. The central thesis of Stumbling on Happiness is that human beings are remarkably bad at predicting what will make us happy. Our predictions are skewed by our imperfect memories and our capacity for filling the future with the present day. The future is gnarlier than futurism. NCC 1701 probably wouldn't send out transporter-equipped drones. Instead, it would likely find itself on missions whose ethos, mores, and rationale are largely incomprehensible to us, and so obvious to its crew that they couldn't hope to explain them. Science fiction is the literature of the present, and the present is the only era that we can hope to understand, because it's the only era that lets us check our observations and predictions against reality. When the singularity is more than a literary device. An interview with futurist inventor Ray Kurzweil, originally published in Asimov's science fiction magazine. June 2005. It's not clear to me whether the singularity is a technical belief system or a spiritual one. The singularity, a notion that's crept into a lot of sci-fi, and whose most articulate in-genre spokesmodel is Vernor Vinge, describes the black hole in history that will be created at the moment when human intelligence can be digitized. When the speed and scope of our cognition is hitched to the price-performance curve of microprocessors, our progress will double every 18 months, and then every 12 months, and then every 10, and eventually, every 5 seconds. Singularities are, literally, holes in space from whence no information can emerge, and so SF writers occasionally mutter about how hard it is to tell a story set after the information singularity. Everything will be different. What it means to be human will be so different that what it means to be in danger, or happy, or sad, or any of the other elements that make up the squeeze and release tension in a good yarn will be unrecognizable to us pre-singletons. It's a neat conceit to write around. I've committed singularity a couple of times, usually in collaboration with Gonzo Singleton Charlie Strauss, the mad antipope of the singularity. But those stories have the same relation to futurism as romance novels do to love, a shared jumping-off point, but radically different morphologies. Of course, the singularity isn't just a conceit for noodling within the pages of the pulps. It's the subject of serious-minded punditry, futurism, and even science. Ray Kurzweil is one such pundit futurist scientist. He's a serial entrepreneur who founded successful businesses that advanced the fields of optical character recognition, machine reading software, text-to-speech synthesis, synthetic musical instrument simulation, computer-based speech recognition, and stock market analysis. He cured his own type 2 diabetes through a careful review of the literature and the judicious application of first principles and reason. To a casual observer, Kurzweil appears to be the star of some kind of Heinlein novel, stealing fire from the gods and embarking on a quest to bring his maverick ideas to the public despite the dismissals of the establishment, getting rich in the process. Kurzweil believes in the singularity. In his 1990 manifesto, The Age of Intelligent Machines, Kurzweil persuasively argued that we were on the brink of meaningful machine intelligence. A decade later, he continued the argument in a book called The Age of Spiritual Machines, whose most audacious claim is that the world's computational capacity has been slowly doubling since the crust first cooled and before, and that the doubling interval has been growing shorter and shorter with each passing year, so that now we see it reflected in the computer industry's Moore's Law, which predicts that microprocessors will get twice as powerful for half the cost about every 18 months. The breathtaking sweep of this trend has an obvious conclusion: computers more powerful than people, more powerful than we can comprehend. Now Kurzweil has published 2 more books. The Singularity is Near, When Humans Transcend Biology, Viking, Spring 2005, and Fantastic Voyage, Live Long Enough to Live Forever, with Terry Grossman, Rodale, November 2004.